Yesterday, before I came to this health convention, I woke up in the morning and I was watching the news. And they were interviewing somebody who had organized a workshop on how to grow cannabis. Yes, it was in the news a week before. And as they were talking about this workshop that ran yesterday, they were saying after the tickets were released, the workshop was fully booked in 2 days. Because people want to know how to cultivate, how to grow cannabis. That was yesterday. Then this morning, I woke up to the news that in the Western Cape, the law enforcement had confiscated more than 11,000 liters of alcohol. Alcohol that was illegally sold. And they destroyed all this alcohol. And people were commenting about what a waste. 11,000 liters of alcohol, and the cameras were there, and the law enforcement officers were pouring it down the drain, and that made news. If you are in South Africa, you would have realized that we have been in the news not for the right reasons. 2 months ago, on the 18th of September, we were in the news globally because we had legalized cannabis. And people were praising South Africa because we have a progressive constitution. So this is the country, this is the world that we live in. And so it is in that context that I'm going to talk about substance abuse in South Africa. And and then we're going to start briefly to look at addiction. What is addiction? Firstly, we have to acknowledge that it's a brain disease. Am I right? Yes, it is a brain disease. So, some people that have addictions, it doesn't mean that they are evil, it means they are sick. And if they are sick, they need help. And it is in that spirit that we have to look at them and be able and be willing to assist. It is compulsive. People that are addicted are not able to stop. And they do it because of pleasure. They derive some pleasure out of this addiction. Either they're getting pleasure or they want to escape some discomfort. I know of many things that we like as people. I've never heard of somebody who cannot just wake up until I have eaten a potato. Have you ever heard of that? No. But some people cannot just imagine functioning without a cup of coffee. Can you see the difference? I know we love coffee. We do, ne? But coffee is addictive. Okay, so if there is a food substance that drives you into addiction, then you must know there's something wrong there. God never intended us to enjoy food and be addicted to food. Yes, we can love our pap and we can love our cabbage, but I've never heard of anybody being addicted to cabbage or apple or potato or whatever. But as soon as something has the capacity to get you addicted, then you know that we are treading on a dangerous ground. And it's also good to note that an addiction can be a substance, like cannabis or alcohol, but it can also be a behavior. Some behaviors are addictive. And that addiction can be physical or psychological. And it is manifested, it shows by continuous use, despite the harmful effects. In other words, you know that this cigarette is not good for me. It harms my lungs, but you have this urge to use it. You know intellectually that it's not good for you, but you can't just help it. Then that's what we call addiction. Now, the substance that you're addicted to, or the behavior that you engaged in addictively, offers some kind of reward. And then this reward that you get is an incentive to continue. So the more, if you feel stressed and you're a smoker, you feel like that cigarette, and then you smoke the cigarette, the reward is that you feel relaxed, and that becomes an incentive to continue. And of course, all addictions affect the quality of life of the person that is addicted. So that is addiction. Now, let's look at a few examples of addictions. The first category is behavior addictions. That includes gambling, pornography, and cell phone addiction. Although cell phone addiction is not yet listed in the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, it qualifies, it has criteria that actually show that people are getting more and more addicted to cell phones. So that's the bad news. But let's look at substances. So remember I said that addiction can be behavior or it can be a substance. If you look at substances, we are talking about illicit substances. We are talking cannabis or cocaine, heroin, and things like that. But the caffeine, I spoke about coffee a few minutes ago. We can also be addicted to alcohol. We can be addicted to nicotine, tobacco, which is the active ingredient in tobacco, and so those are the various things. Now, let us check ourselves if we are addicted to cell phones. Can we do that? Yes. If you are preoccupied with your cell phone, sometimes we are preoccupied with our cell phones, even in church. We want to be scrolling. That's the first indication that you may be addicted to cell phone. If the cell phone occupies you, if you can't switch it off when you go to bed, in case somebody calls, you want to keep it here, it's an indication that, remember, addiction is compulsive, and you are not able to stop. So if you are not able to stop the use of your cell phone, then you may be addicted, or excessive use of cell phones, or if you attempt but you fail to use the cell phone less often. So in other words, you're aware that, but I think I'm too occupied with my cell phone, and you want to use it less, but you fail. You end up using it despite your knowledge that it is affecting you. Then you may be addicted. And lastly, if it puts your relationships or your job at risk. I know of a young man who actually lost a job. He was working in an insurance company. He actually lost his job. He was told over and over again, no cell phone during these times. But he just could not let go of his cell phone until he lost his job. So use those criteria, check yourself if you're addicted to your cell phone, and take action. Now let's come back to our substances. What is a psychoactive substance? This is just a revision. It is a drug, it's a chemical substance that changes brain function. Our brains are made in a way that they have to function in a certain way. So if you use a substance that changes how your brain works, then it means then that substance is psychoactive. And it may affect how the brain works behaviorally. In other words, once you use this substance, you behave in a way that is not normal. For instance, some people use alcohol or cocaine and then they start being violent. You understand what I mean? Under normal circumstances, they wouldn't be violent or they would restrain themselves. But because this substance affects how the brain works, then they become violent. Sometimes they use substances that changes their perception. And when perception is changed, then you live in a different world because of the change that can be brought by a substance. Sometimes these substances affect consciousness. You know, when people have used certain substances, they sleep, they become drowsy, or they sleep for 24 hours until the substance wears off. It can also change the mood or the cognition, how your brain reasons. So, psychoactive substances can be used medicinally or recreationally, but today I'm focusing on the abuse of substances, therefore I'm talking recreational use. Okay, now remember that the talk is about drug addiction in South Africa, and I want to make a statement by saying we have high prevalence of addiction in South Africa. That is the first statement. But how do I know? I know, we all know, because these are the indications. The indication is that we have very high road carnage in our country. When it comes to December, Christmas and Easter, then we start seeing flyers about arrive alive, and then the police, and then the Minister of Transport makes statements, because we know that during this festive season, in 1 month, we are going to lose at least 1,400 people in 3 weeks, actually. 1,300 people at least in the roads of South Africa. They die because there are road crashes, because people speed, because people have altered perception. And they think that I can easily overtake this car, or quickly. The perception that the other car is coming is distorted. And then you wonder why people become involved in head-on collisions. So that, the road carnage is one indication that we have high prevalence of substance abuse in our country. The second indication is the fetal alcohol syndrome. It is actually said because globally, when people talk about fetal alcohol syndrome, or FAS, South Africa is an example. In other words, we drink when we are pregnant to the extent that our children, 12% of our children are born with this syndrome. So they are harmed in utero when their mothers are pregnant. And we are the #1 country in the world where this syndrome is prevalent. We know that. So that is another indication that we have high levels of addiction. We are now seeing what I call nyaupe babies. Nyaupe babies is the same thing like fetal alcohol syndrome. These are mothers who use nyaupe, a very addictive substance, when they are pregnant. And when they are born, when the children are born, most of them are less than 1.4 kilogram in weight. They have a low APGAR score, they are not strong, and most of them have to go to neonatal ICU for some time. What is said about nyaupe babies is that they start fitting, having convulsions a few minutes after birth. So, we know that we have an addiction problem in South Africa. The last indication is that we have so many young people, children, dropping out of school because of the use of substances. They drop out because they go to school when they are high, there's poor academic performance, or they just stay away because they want to stay with their friends and smoke various types or use various types of drugs. So, do we have a high prevalence of substance abuse in this country? Yes, we do. This one, yeah, okay. Now, let's briefly look at the types and categories of psychoactive substances. Literature will give you many more, but I've just chosen these five. The first category is stimulants. These are the substances that speed up the brain. So people become alert, they become jam, they have energy, so that is the category. And then opposite to that, we have what we call depressants. These slow down the central nervous system of the brain activities. Then we have hallucinogens. These disrupt the communication with the brain. So if somebody has taken a hallucinogen, this person loses reality. These are the people who will see a lion coming through that door. And then they start running. Or they jump off cliffs because they think somebody is shooting them. So it totally messes up their brain. And then we have opioids, which numb pain. And then on the last, the last, it's not the row, it's the column. The last column is examples of the various types of drugs. And then we have another category, which we spoke about yesterday, which is the novel psychoactive substances. This is a relatively new category of substances. You know, they are called by different names. Some of them are newly synthesized, but in South Africa, we have an example of that, which is called Nyaupe, and it has devastated many communities. So the effect depends on the cocktail. So novel psychoactive drugs often, and in our case, people take different types, they mix them together. For instance, they take stimulants and depressants and opioids, they put them together and then they use dacha. So when, and then this mixture is very addictive, very, very addictive. In the history of substance abuse in the country, we have never seen anything that looks like that with the same effects as Nyaupe. So what are the effects? The effects depend on the cocktail. The common ingredient there is heroin. So because it's a depressant, many of them walk like dazed, tired, etc. So those are the different categories. What are the contributory factors? We have increased social pressures. So these are the drivers to the use of psychoactive substances. Remember, psychoactive substances, they numb the pain, they alter your consciousness. So a lot of people, if they have problems, social stressors, and they want to escape, they use psychoactive substances. Remember, earlier on, I said people use these to avoid pain or discomfort. So that's a contributory effect. Because we have many social pressures, the prevalence of substance abuse increases. Another significant contributory factor is that we have the disintegration of the social fabric. We no longer have the support that we used to have years back. We have lost, many of us come from broken families. We have lost that family support structures. where children or young people would go to if they have problems. So now, because they don't have people to go to, they go to the street to use drugs. And then we also have the social environment as a contributory factor. The social environment that enables substance abuse. If you live in an area where 75% of the people drink, that's a social environment that affects you. Then you end up being influenced by that, and then you end up there. Then, of course, we have the powerful drug trade, which runs internationally, continentally, and local. But another contributory factor is the push for self-determination legislation. This is the legislation that says, I have the right to do what I want. It is on that basis that cannabis was legalized in South Africa. People are arguing that this is my body. If I get harmed while using it, it's my decision. Therefore, leave me alone. I actually attended a conference in October, on the 14th of October. And I was invited to this conference because it was going to talk about policy on substance abuse. And of course, I accepted the invitation and I went to this conference. And by the end of the first day, I realized that the conference is about the self-determination legislation. People are arguing in that conference that now that cannabis has been legalized, Parliament has been given 24 months to work on the details and change the Drug Trafficking Act. We have to work towards influencing the legislators so that they make it easier for people to access cannabis. They're arguing that it's not good enough that cannabis has been legalized for private use. No, if I'm in my car and I want to carry cannabis, I can do that. They are also saying because the Constitutional Court did not specify the amount that is allowed, let's influence legislation so that we get as high volumes as possible. So it is actually an agenda that is driven. So we have to be aware of that. What are the general trends? We have seen that younger children are getting hooked on drugs. We have seen that more and more people are using drugs, which increases the prevalence. We have seen new drugs being introduced. We have also seen ease of access for certain drugs, which determine the prevalence in certain communities. As an example, patterns of alcohol use and consumption of nyaupe is rife in black communities because it's easy to buy liquor there. The control mechanisms are not that stringent. Every fifth house is a tavern, so it's easy to buy and to use. Then we have community empowerment or lack thereof. By community empowerment, I mean there are people who will not allow taverns to be started in their communities. But and those are what I deem to be empowered communities. But in certain communities, you can sell liquor, you can sell to 10-year-olds. These are disempowered communities. So whether the community is empowered or not will show the trend. Then we have socioeconomic status and literature does support that poverty levels, race, determine the trends of drug use. And by socioeconomic, remember I'm not saying low socioeconomic, I'm saying socioeconomic. So we have high socioeconomic, low socioeconomic. If you go to a township in Tembisa, there are trends, there are certain types of drugs that are used there, nyaupe being one of them because it's cheap. you can buy nyaupe with 30 rand, which is what, maybe $3, $2.50, and you can actually buy a fix. Okay, it's cheap there. It's made available specifically because there's poverty there, and the aim is to enable or to get as many people as you can. And if you go to certain areas like Sandton, it doesn't mean that there's no substance abuse there. There is, but they use different types of substances. They drink different types of liquor. They don't drink beer, but they drink whiskey and other things. So the socio-economic, therefore, tells us the trend at which are rife in any particular community. What is the prevalence then of substance abuse? I must also start by saying we don't know the prevalence of substance abuse in South Africa. The reason being that for a long time, we haven't conducted national studies. So to say, generally, this is the prevalence. But we have pockets of smaller studies being conducted in certain communities, in certain provinces, among certain groups of people. But the United Nations World Drug Report identifies South Africa as one of the drug capitals of the world, which is something that we are not proud of, ne? We're not proud of that status. That drug consumption in South Africa, not drug consumption, alcohol consumption in South Africa is twice the world norm. You know, the world norm in alcohol, they measure, they calculate how many liters of alcohol, and they consider pure alcohol. And then they say, how many people in this country drink alcohol? And then they say, per person on average, if there are 57 million people in South Africa, on average, every person in South Africa per year drinks about 10 liters of pure alcohol. That's how bad it is. Okay. And of course, and then 15% of South Africans have a drug problem. I don't know whether that still stands. Probably it's more now. And then to enable the crime rate, drugs do play a part there. We also know that the prevalence is increasing rapidly. And then we don't have adequate prevention strategies. We have poor law enforcement, especially in areas of low socioeconomic status, because as I said, there's very poor control of our alcohol outlets. There's poor control of curbing the use of illicit drugs. Now, legalization of cannabis, which occurred on the 18th of September, is a blow to efforts against substance abuse. And although many people cheered and were excited about this development, they only heard the one part that was pronounced by Justice Zondo, that cannabis is legalized. They missed the second part, which says, however, we do acknowledge the huge negative social impact. That one a lot of people don't talk about. They only talk about the legalization. So, what does literature say? This study, and this, I've organized these studies sequentially. In 2007, it was reported that 45% of men and 17% of women consume alcohol in South Africa. That's a lot. It's a lot. And that white men were most likely to drink and Asian women were least likely. That the urban residents are more likely to drink compared to rural ones. That a third of current drinkers reported risky drinking. Risky drinking includes binge drinking. And associated factors with alcohol use include low socioeconomic status, people that don't have formal education, and people that are older than 25 years. Now, And then there was a study which was published in 2007. They estimate that 50% of men drink alcohol and 20% of women, which is similar to the first study. We spoke about 45% of men and 17% of women. So this then is the estimate of substance abuse in the country. And then in 2008, Stein et al. Reported that 13% of South Africans have substance use disorders. They also made a statement that in comparison with data from other African countries, South Africa has a particularly high lifetime prevalence of substance abuse. So when we compare to other African countries, our substance abuse prevalence is high. And then Peltzer et al. Spoke about binge drinking and other risky behaviors. And then Peltzer and al. Also spoke about an increase in substance user treatment admissions, that more and more people are seeking help for substance abuse. But mayors in 2010 reported that access to substance abuse treatment is inequitable. In other words, some people have access to treatment while others don't. And it's something that we have always known. And then Peltzer et al., this one, I think we're talking about it, and then Liebenberg et al. So what these Liebenberg and his colleagues did, they screened for illicit drugs after people had died. So they did some postmortems, and they said 55% of those people that had died showed the presence of one or more illicit drugs. What does that mean? It means that South Africa, there's a high mortality that can be explained by the use of illicit drugs. And that most of them are male, and they're between the ages of 20 and 30, and that heroin was the most frequently detected drug, followed by cocaine, alcohol, and illicit drugs, and other illicit drugs. And this was 2016. And now, when you look at these stats, you can clearly see that they performed this study in a predominantly white area. If they would conduct the same study in Soweto or in Mabopane, it would be different. You understand what I mean? Because the trend is different. Why are we concerned then? We are concerned about the high substance abuse because it brings with it physical health challenges. Cancer, heart diseases, lung diseases, and others. It brings with it mental health challenges like substance abuse psychosis and others. It brings with it social health challenges, including people living in the streets and high rates of crime in the community. We are also concerned because it interferes with spiritual health. Remember, the Bible says your body is a temple of God. If you look at the Christians believe that your body is the temple of God. If you look at the Muslims believe that God has control or has a say in what they put in their bodies. Therefore, both Christians and Muslims don't agree, don't support the use of alcohol or other substances. We are also concerned because once you start with substances, it's difficult to quit. We are also concerned because we don't have many programs that are available to assist those that need help. We are concerned because rehabilitation is expensive and relapse is very, very high. People go to rehab centers, which cost a lot of money. And then they come back, they relapse, they're back to where they were. It's expensive also. Because it's expensive, some people don't even have those resources. There are high unemployment rates in certain communities, and just the lack of rehabilitation centers. So this is a public health problem. We are really concerned. And also because resources are scarce, including human resources, we don't have many people that are trained, properly trained, to deal with this scourge that is so high. So we are concerned that we have high prevalence of substance abuse that we cannot deal with. Okay. Now, in this slide, I just want to highlight that legislation can enable or oppose substance abuse. And I'll start with the Tobacco Product Control Act, the amended Tobacco Product Control Act of 1998. This is when we had a very brave Minister of Health who wanted to do something about control of tobacco use. And she introduced measures that, and then the politicians were saying, no, it's too harsh, it's not going to work. But she demonstrated that we can actually amend legislation and so that it effectively controls tobacco use. It was, therefore, the most successful act in enforcing rules about tobacco use in the history of South Africa. And because of that, we started seeing the decrease in cigarette smoking. That was 1998. And then on the 18th of September, a sad day, South Africa then legalizes private cannabis use. And when I was doing my reading, I understand that, they were saying South Africa is the third African country, but when I inquired further, I read that Zimbabwe and Lesotho have legalized it, but for medicinal use, not for recreation. South Africa is using it for recreation. Therefore, just as the Tobacco Products Control Act of 1998 was able to decrease the use of tobacco, this legislation is going to increase the use of cannabis. Logic says that. We can't dictate it. And you know what is said is that private means that you can use it at home, and you can also cultivate it in your garden, and you can have it in your car, but you shouldn't allow your children that are under 18 to smoke. Who's going to police that? So I do think that 18th of September, 2018 is one of the saddest days in the history of substance abuse control in this country. We're still going to reap the consequences of this. This last slide, I'm just saying we have shown that we have a high prevalence. So what do you do? How do we manage addiction? The first thing is that you should acknowledge that we have a problem. Whether it's about yourself, whether it's about your loved one, your son, your daughter, your aunt, whoever, first thing, acknowledge that there is a problem. Secondly, seek professional help. And the first professional help that you should seek is God. Then you can seek spiritual support, social support, etc. There are certain drugs, the addiction levels of drugs are not the same. There are certain drugs where people can decide that I'm not going to smoke anymore, and they call it cold turkey, and people stop. It has a whole lot, it depends on the addiction level, but it also depends on how long you've been using the drug. It also depends on your personality and what you have at stake and things like that. But most people who use drugs actually need help. And so I'm saying whether it's you who needs help, or your son, your daughter, your neighbor, your aunt, seek help. Thank you very much. And that is my email address if you do need to contact me. Thank you. And while she's taking the mic, I have a student in Botswana who told me a month ago that Nyaupe is now in Botswana. And I also have students from Lesotho who told me that Nyaupe is now in Lesotho. What I can just say is Nyaupe is a demon, and I would urge all countries to do their best to get rid of it because before it is entrenched in the communities. Yes.
Okay, I am an aspiring addiction counselor. And in 2014, I decided to start studying towards this, and to specialize in it. But I found to my dismay that South Africa don't have a lot of resources for people that wants to empower themselves. There's a lot of legislation to say you should do this and this and this and this, but there's a lack of resources that can actually certify us as addiction counselors. And what is being done to change that, to empower more people to be able to help?
Yes, we even yesterday we spoke about that. We don't have resources. We don't have allocated resources. Neither do we have allocated resources for research. That's why we don't have national stats about the prevalence. Despite the increase, we are not doing enough to train people to address this problem that is in our faces. So I do think that we are not responding as we should. Yesterday I was telling the people that were in the workshop, in the Nyaupe workshop, that I'm campaigning to be the next Minister of Health. If you vote for me, I'll do something about it.
Thank you, Professor, for this wonderful presentation. My concern will be on the issue of the fetal alcohol syndrome. As you were fortunate to be part of those, or maybe they pulled you without telling you the real reason why they wanted to be in that meeting, what did they say when they learned that the statistics of fetal alcohol syndrome is getting high? Because if our children, newborns are dying, it means we're not going to have a new generation. So that means the older people are going to be left alone, and who's going to push the agenda, especially on the Christian family? What is going to happen? What are they saying? They are saying, let them die, and we'll see what happens.
The fetal alcohol syndrome, it's a phenomenon that has been with us for a number of years. It's not a new issue. I was just highlighting it as an indication that we are in trouble in this country because the FAS is increasing rather than decreasing. So we're getting more and more women drinking excessively when they are pregnant. And you know, the sad thing is that these kids are born with mental, retardation. They are not, and so we have a serious problem. And as I say, unfortunately, when globally, when people talk about FAS, they quote South Africa. It's sad, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor, for that presentation as well. Yeah. My question generally goes to the church at large. Doesn't this information provide an opportunity for the church to have some mission?
Yes, it should. It should. That is why if you look at the program for this convention, it has a lot to do with recovery, substance abuse, and that is an aspect of the church acknowledging that we have a problem and that we should do something about it. So my answer to you is yes, both at this level, but I also know that at conferences, at local churches, there are definitely some programs that address this issue. Thank you very much.
Sorry. The question was asked, does this provide mission for the church? The answer is an incontrovertible yes. The next question is, who is the church? Who is the church? So unless we take hold of this, we are talking about total member involvement in all kinds of things. We have to take this ministry right into the very churches we attend. Is there material? Are people working hard on helping with prevention programs, youth alive programs, recovery programs, mental health programs, writing about alcohol? There's just been an article August 23 this year, which reiterates and points out the stand that we have taken over 150 years, that there is a zero benefit to health for alcohol, and that the safe level of alcohol consumption is how much? Zero. And yet, in our churches, we are busy talking about whether you're a pesco vegetarian or a total vegetarian, or whether you're an ovo-lacto vegetarian, or we are splitting hairs about some really inconsequential issues and not getting to the real deal. We are not being relevant to our young people. So I want to leave that with you. Is there work being done at many levels? Are people trying to provide materials? Is there, and this, as Professor Mokwena has said, this conference, this summit, the training that is taking place here is focused very heavily on mental health, addictions, on the ways that we can breathe free program. So there's a strong, strong emphasis. The plea that I have and that we have and that we share with you, let's not leave this place the same as we came to it, thinking, who is going to do this work? We have to do it. Each one of us has to do it. We have to take hold of it and go back to the basics with our kids, right from kindergarten, right through to university. And our older people, you heard about, and I hate to correct my good and learned and respected, loved friend, when you said people drink excessively in pregnancy, a drop of alcohol in pregnancy is excessive. It's excessive. Do our young people know it? Do they? Are we teaching them? What kind of medical missionary work are we really doing when we get engaged in all kinds of things which are of themselves may be very good, and yet we ignore the elephant in the room? My prayer is, as we continue the conversation, as the leadership of this division in health takes hold of leading, teaching, instructing, providing resources, that we will come to the table. And I thank you for being here. You know, speaking as directly as I am with this group is like preaching to the choir. You came because you want to learn. But let's take that message. Let's be the difference when we get back.